Welcome to Speak Life with Dr. Amy Chai. Information for your best life. Now, here's Amy Chai.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Speak Life New Haven. I'm Dr. Amy Chai, and today I'm going to talk about something that's actually it's really difficult for me to talk about. It's very painful for me to talk about. But I know that out there in the audience, probably at least 10% of you will be able to relate to what I'm saying. And there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of ignorance. But I'm not afraid to talk about it, and I'm going to talk about it. And this is going to be my first in a series on mental illness. And today I'm going to talk about serious mental illness, the most serious types of mental illness, how it affects patients, how it affects their families, and how it affects you, whether you know someone with mental illness or not. And listen carefully, it's going to be a difficult topic. It's going to be hard to swallow, let's just say. So let's bring up, without further ado, the first topic that I would like to talk about today. And that topic is something called ANOSOGNOSIA. Let's say it again. It's called ANOSOGNOSIA. Now that is a very big and weird word, and you may or may not have heard it. But let's break it down into its part. A means without. Noso means disease. And nosia means knowledge. So what anosognosia means is without knowledge of the disease that you have. And anosognosia is something that is very common in the world of mental illness. And it's something more than denial. It's something more than just wanting to refuse treatment. What anosognosia means is that the patient literally, completely has no idea that they're ill. And today I want to talk about a little bit about what that means to patients and their families. So let's talk about how common anosognosia is. And when we're talking about anosognosia, we're really talking about insight. What insight does the patient have into their illness? They don't realize that they're ill. It turns out that about half of everyone with schizophrenia and about 40% of everyone with bipolar disorder has what is known as anosognosia. That is, that they have absolutely no insight into their disease and they don't believe that they are ill. Now, with schizophrenia, you may not know what schizophrenia is. It's a very serious illness where people often have hallucinations and delusions and often paranoid thoughts. So, for example, they may hear voices, and some of the voices may tell them that, aliens are beaming laser beams into their brain, or they may tell them that the government is causing secret sort of experiments on them that's going to cause them pain. And these delusions and these hallucinations are often persecutory in nature, which means they get the belief that everyone is against them. And it can be a very terrifying, very painful type of a mental state to be in, to really believe that these things that you think are happening to you are real, okay? Even when they're objectively not real. And of course, they are objectively not real. Um, the other illness, of course, being bipolar disorder. And bipolar disorder, you may know, is a type of disorder where sometimes people have extra energy and are awake all the time and very creative and, just raring to go and getting a lot of things done. And sometimes they engage in risky behaviors when they're in this, what we call manic state. And then they can crash and get so depressed and want to commit suicide. And sometimes with the bipolar disorder, that sort of goes up and down and up and down. And that needs to be controlled with medications and sort of the mood needs to be stabilized. But about 40% of bipolar patients, they don't realize that they're ill either, especially if they have some of those psychotic features, which is the kind of the disordered thinking. So what we're seeing maybe about 3% of the population having a very severe mental illness, and a significant portion of these people are not aware that they're ill. So, why is this a problem? Okay, well, let's look at this a little bit more in depth. So, when people aren't aware that they're ill, they don't want medication. And of course, why would you want medication? Why? It doesn't make sense that you'd want medication if you don't think you're ill. And that's especially true if you have persecutory delusions where you actually believe that maybe that physician who's actually trying to help you is part of the conspiracy to harm you in some sort of way. Um, so so a lot of these people don't have any insight and they're very seriously ill. And the irony is, here's the ultimate irony is the more serious the disease, the more likely the patient is to completely be without any insight to the fact that they're actually sick. And one of the biggest things that people in this group of patients is going to say is, I'm not sick and I don't need help. And these are patients that are disproportionately represented in a lot of problematic things that happen in our society. So I have put this image up here. There's a 3% of the population that have the most serious, the most lacking in insight. This 3% is very overrepresented because they commit 10% of the homicides and they're involved in 20% of all law enforcement deaths. They're involved in 29% of all family related homicides. And who can forget that woman who like drowned her children in the bathtub and horrible things like that because she thought, I don't know, some voices told her to do it. Um, and 50% of the mass killings. Now, the mass killings depends on what you define as mass killings. Usually, they define them as like, for this particular data set, it would be like the rampage mass killing rather than like the drug um, execution type of killings. So, about half of the mass killings that are kind of what we call the rampage killings. So that's the problems that they cause with violence in society, even though the vast majority of even the most seriously mental ill patients are not violent at all. Okay. The most of them are not. And the vast majority of homicides and crimes are committed by people who do not have mental illness. Still, when we do have mental illness, especially untreated mental illness of which the patient is completely unwilling to recognize, this is the group that has a big disproportionate number of problems. But not only that, they themselves, if you see the bottom part of this graph that I put up there, they are 1,600%. That's 1,600% more likely to be killed by law enforcement and also otherwise victimized. So this is a population that is both subject to violence and committing violence. So really the key for people with serious mental illness is treatment. Having some insight, which often improves once medication is given, plus medication adherence is very important because medication adherence prevents violence, arrests, and victimizations. And I'm going to read some studies for you that I have right here. There was a 3-year study involving 1,906 seriously mentally ill patients. And this study went on for 3 years, and they found that medication adherence was strongly correlated with violence, arrests, and victimizations. So people who took their medications were significantly less likely to have problems with the violence or arrests or victimizations. Another study was done with 133 patients, and this study took 6 months. And out of these 133 patients over a 6-month period, 13% of them were arrested for violent acts over this 6-month study period. But what they found was very, very interestingly, of the people who were violent, 71% of them were not taking their meds. But of the people who were nonviolent, only 17% were not taking their meds. So, what we see is in seriously mentally ill patients, medication adherence is very correlated to whether or not they're going to get engaged in some sort of violence or difficult situation like that involving law enforcement. So, what happens is when they have no insight and they're able to refuse medications, they have no medications, they're not adherent to treatment. And that's when violence and aggression happens. And the truth is that patients who have schizophrenia are 10 times more likely to end up in jail than to end up in the hospital. And that's the sad truth to this problem of anosognosia is that we have ended up criminalizing mental illness. Well, how did that happen? How did we criminalize mental illness? Well, that actually happened when there was a push to close down mental health hospitals. And now there's 44 states in the union out of 50 where their prison population has more mental health patients than their largest mental health hospital. So what we're seeing is that our prison system is actually becoming a mental hospital. It's treating substance use disorders, it's treating serious mental illnesses because we have begun to criminalize mental health instead of treating mental health. Is that crazy? I think it kind of is. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to me. And what are the costs? What are the costs to society? Well, We have the homeless crisis. I find that homeless shelters spend $1.9 billion a year on people who are severely mentally ill. Emergency room care spends $2.6 billion a year on the seriously mentally ill. And law enforcement spends $14.3 billion a year, which is 9.2% of the entire total budget of law enforcement is spent treating serious mental illnesses. Why are we treating mental illness with the police? Why aren't we treating it with mental hospitals and access to mental care? I'll tell you why. The one reason this is happening is because of patient autonomy for patients with anosognosia. So I'm sure you all know about patients' rights, patients' autonomy. You can't force a person to take a medical treatment. Um, but if the problem is with your body, like let's say, for example, you have a cancer, right? But you don't understand that you have cancer, then you will be your family member will be asked to make decisions on your behalf. That's called power of attorney. And everybody's probably, and if you haven't, do it now. Sign a paper that tells the doctors who can make decisions on your behalf if you're mentally incapacitated. But if you have cancer and you don't understand that you have cancer, you're going to have someone else step in as power of attorney to help you make those decisions. But if you have a serious mental illness and you're not aware that you have a serious mental illness, guess what? They consider you competent to refuse treatment because you think you're not sick and you don't need help. So I totally agree with, we can't force people to take treatment. But what about people with anosognosia? People who don't realize they're ill? Should we really believe that they're competent to make decisions for their health when they don't realize they even have a health problem? I think that is a very big concern. And in our economy, especially for people who have serious mental health problems like this, we spend $155 billion annually on them. That's $44,773 per person with this disease because they're not being treated. That's a lot of money. And it's not just a lot of money, it's a lot of pain. It's a lot of pain. And here's where I'm going to get a little bit personal. Um, Now, if you never knew anyone outside yourself who was willing to talk about mental illness in their family, you might think that you're alone, that you're the only one who suffers with someone in your family who has a serious mental illness. But guess what? You're not. You're not. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. Um, and it's not easy to talk about, partially because of the stigma and partially because it's a painful story to tell. Um, the story is that my own mother suffers from schizophrenia with anosognosia. She has persecutory delusions and hallucinations, and she's had them for many, many, many years. Um, how has that affected us as a family? Well, one of the problems that has cropped up in association with this schizophrenia is something known as hoarding disorder. So I don't know if you watched the TV show Hoarders, but I did grow up in a hoarding home. It was a home where there was so much shame associated with the home. You could never allow anyone in the home. I never had a friend come into my home. We never had a relative come into my home. We were completely isolated, living in disorder that was really unimaginable to most normal people. And there's something about hoarding. People who are hoarders, they don't want you to clean up the hoard. And that's part of the crazy part, you know. And she has done this for her whole life. Um, and the house, we had a house growing up that was not professionally built. It was built by my father, and we helped. It was a nice small house, very cute little house, but there was the hoarding involved. And my mother wouldn't allow anyone to do any repairs ever. So it got worse and worse. And over time, it basically started to collapse in on itself. And we were unable to get her out of the house. And so we had to call the police. Okay. And um, I'm not proud of the fact that we also had to say that she had threatened suicide, because if we didn't say that, they would not come to take her. So as soon as the police got to our house, they immediately condemned it, put, do not cross tape, and like locked it up with a big lock, and took my mother to the psychiatric hospital, where she got a dose of medication, and she was normal with the medication. She was normal. Okay. Um, she went to the store. She went to church. She went to the beach. Um, these were like amazing, magical moments of normalness, but the medication wore off. And not only would nobody prescribe it because we didn't have access to a psychiatrist, but she didn't feel that she needed it, because as it wore off, she lost whatever insight that she had, and she didn't think she really needed it anymore. So, but during that time, I was able to bring her to Connecticut, where I purchased a new house for her, had it all fixed up for my parents, and she started the hoarding process there. I'm just going to pull up a very embarrassing picture, but I'm going to show it anyway. I'm just going to show it anyway. Okay. This is my arm. You can see like a big bruise on it. That is actually my mother's thumbprint on my arm, and you can see the red next to it and the blue in the middle. I was trying to clean a little bit in the house. Um, and she grabbed me pretty violently, pulled my arms, both of them, and bruised up my arms. She's 88 years old, and she was able to pull my arms and bruise them so hard that I couldn't clean up the house. And this is the kind of reaction that she has whenever you try to clean the house. I'm taking that down now. Thanks. I don't want to see that. So anyway, recently, my mother had a heart event that caused clots to build up in the heart, and a clot went to the brain and caused a stroke. Well, she went to the hospital and was able to perfectly understand everything about the clot, everything about the heart event, everything about the purpose of every medication, everything. She was able to understand it perfectly well. So the psychiatrist who came to analyze whether she was competent to make her own decisions declared that she was competent to make all decisions about her cardiovascular health. Well, she thought that the clot was caused by evil forces who wanted her to experience the stroke. She thought that the medications were designed to harm her. She thought the physical therapists were there to abuse her. So even now, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop because no one in the healthcare system is willing to concede that my mother isn't competent to make decisions about her health care, even though she believes that her health condition was caused by the evil people who want to persecute her. That's how deep the insanity is of the psychiatry profession in our country that refuses to treat people with anosognosia, even though they have no idea that they're ill, even though they're the most severely ill. The psychiatrist said, and I quote, "Your mother is absolutely free to make her own bad decisions." Okay. Well, these are life and death decisions. If you have a blood clot, if you have a stroke, if you have a heart problem that's causing blood clots to go to your brain, and you decide that you don't want any of those medications because they're bad, evil medications because the doctor's trying to kill you. Well, is that really competence or is that totally not competence? Well, I think it's not competence. But at this point, I really have to watch my mother die because the psychiatrists don't believe that they should treat people who have no insight into their illness. My entire life, the life of my entire family, has been damaged incalculably by trying to care for a member of our family who is this ill. And you know what? I'm not alone. There's thousands of people out here in America struggling to get help for their family members, struggling to get medications and psychiatric care for their family members who don't know that they're ill or don't believe that they're ill because they have anosognosia and they're not getting the treatment that they need. All the data that I provided to you earlier came from an organization called Treatment Advocacy Center, and their website is treatmentadvocacycenter.org. And if you have a family member who is suffering, threatening your family, harming themselves, um, living in a little hole covered up with newspapers that they hoard, um, reach out to this organization. Reach out to this organization. It's the people who are the most seriously ill who are not aware of their illness. These are the people that we need to treat with assisted outpatient therapy, AOT, which means mandated treatment until they can understand the nature of their illness, because it's not fair for them to kill themselves, kill their family members, kill random other people on the streets, you know, destroy their homes, destroy their families. It's just not fair. It's not right. It's causing our nation a lot of expense, a lot of pain, and a lot of trauma. And you know what? If they were in their right mind, they wouldn't want to see themselves that way. Um, So I know it's very controversial what I've just said, that I think we should treat patients with anosognosia. I think we should. I really do. Um, if you agree with me, click the link below. Um, but in the next couple of episodes, I'm going to talk about other less serious types of mental illness. Most mental illnesses are not nearly that serious, not nearly that serious. And it's important to know what those illnesses are. So I hope you'll listen as we learn a little bit more about mental illness and some of the treatments that are available for you and for your loved ones. And let's take the stigma out of mental illness so we can all learn to talk about it. And so it was me first, now you. So now you know what I've been through. And I hope you're not going through anything like it. But if you are, you're not alone. So we'll see you next time on Speak Life New Haven and speak life into someone's world today. Thank you for watching.
Tune in next time for Speak Life with Dr. Amy Chai at ctpolitics.tv.